Sometimes I think my addiction didn't start the day I picked something up. It started years earlier, on a night I can still feel in my body. I was sitting at the edge of my bed, staring at the tiny crack in the wall like it could explain why the house felt so heavy. I remember holding my breath when the floor creaked downstairs, praying the noise wouldn't turn into shouting. It's strange how a child can't name fear, can't understand silence, yet somehow absorbs all of it. That was the night I learned to shrink, to disappear, to survive. As I grew older, the world assumed I was fine. I laughed at the right moments, I worked hard, I looked put together enough that no one asked questions. But inside, something was always buzzing, an unrest I couldn't soothe. And the first time something finally quieted that noise, even for a moment, I mistook it for healing. Later, I would learn a study found that people who grow up under chronic emotional stress have a far higher risk of addiction, not because they're weak, but because their nervous system grows up drowning, and drowning people don't seek pleasure, they seek air. My addictions didn't look dramatic, they looked ordinary. Another episode, another late night scroll, another relationship where I settled for crumbs because crumbs were familiar. These weren't acts of self-destruction. They were attempts to escape the unbearable echo of a childhood I never got to process. The truth is, most of us don't chase a high, we chase silence. We chase safety. We chase the version of ourselves who never got to breathe freely. And what scares me most is this: for years I thought my struggle meant something was wrong with me, but now I'm starting to wonder, what if the addiction was never the flaw? What if it was the alarm? What if it was the younger version of us, whispering through every craving? I'm still hurting. Please don't leave me here again. When you hear the word trauma, your mind probably goes to big events, violence, loss, disaster. But the truth is, many of the wounds that shape addiction don't look dramatic at all. They look like the nights you tiptoed around the house because the air felt too tense. The mornings you tried to be easy, quiet, or good so no one would get upset. The moments you laughed softly so you wouldn't attract attention. You didn't have the words back then, but your nervous system was taking notes. It was learning that the world wasn't safe. It was learning to survive, not to grow. As a child, your brain was still forming. Every experience shaped your wiring, and when your environment felt unpredictable, whether through yelling, coldness, or emotional absence, your body stayed on alert. Cortisol, the stress hormone, flooded your system again and again. You didn't know the science, but you knew the feeling. Tight chest, clenched stomach, the instinct to stay small. Over time, this constant activation reshaped the architecture of your brain. Your amygdala, the alarm center, became overly sensitive. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for emotional control, developed more slowly. A 2009 study in the Journal of Neuroscience showed that children under chronic stress actually have reduced PFC volume, which makes regulating impulses and emotions much harder later in life. But trauma doesn't only change how you handle fear. It alters how you experience joy. When you grow up without consistent warmth or emotional safety, the brain's dopamine system, the part responsible for reward and motivation, becomes fragile. Everyday moments that should feel good don't. Joy doesn't land deeply. Safety feels foreign. Connection feels distant. So later in life, when you stumble upon something, alcohol, food, scrolling, a person that suddenly quiets the noise inside you, your brain lights up. Not because you're chasing pleasure, but because, for the first time in years, you feel relief. A moment of calm. A breath that doesn't hurt. Your body remembers trauma too, just not in words. It remembers through sensations. The sinking stomach when someone changes tone, the tension in your shoulders before you realize you're scared, the sudden urge to disappear. These are emotional flashbacks, your nervous system reliving old danger. And when those flashbacks hit, you don't respond like an adult. You respond like the child who didn't feel safe. That's why the urge to escape through substances, habits, or behaviors can feel overwhelming. It's not about getting high. It's about shutting off a feeling you were never taught how to hold. And here's the part most people misunderstand. The brain doesn't distinguish emotional pain from physical pain. Being ignored, shamed, or emotionally abandoned hurts the nervous system just as deeply as getting physically hurt. So when you reach for something that soothes the pain, it isn't weakness. It's biology doing its best to keep you alive. Little by little, the survival strategies you learned as a child, staying small, staying quiet, staying alert, follow you into adulthood. They make you more vulnerable to anything that promises comfort, even if that comfort is temporary. That's how childhood trauma becomes addiction. Not in one sudden moment, but through years of a nervous system trying to survive a world that never felt safe. So when someone asks, "Why don't you just stop?" they don't understand the truth. Your addiction didn't start with the substance. It started with a nervous system shaped by fear instead of safety. And before you ever reached for something to numb the pain, your brain had already been changed by it. That's the psychology of an addict, not broken, not weak, but someone who adapted in the only way they could. When you were little, you didn't choose your survival patterns. They chose you. They grew inside the quiet moments when you realized no one was coming to comfort you. They took shape in the nights you cried without making a sound, or the mornings you acted fine to avoid setting someone off. Maybe you became the child who tried to be invisible so no one would get angry, or the child who became the peacemaker, smoothing everything over just to feel safe for a moment, or the overachiever who believed love had to be earned. Those patterns didn't make sense back then, but they kept you alive. Over time, these survival instincts became automatic. You learned to scan every room, every expression, every silence. You learned to anticipate other people's moods before your own needs even crossed your mind. You learned how to shrink your voice or your presence or your truth. And as you grew older, these patterns didn't disappear. They followed you into adulthood like invisible scripts written long before you were old enough to understand them. Maybe you became the adult who works until exhaustion because slowing down makes the old fear resurface. Maybe you became the adult who stays busy, stays distracted, stays in motion because stillness feels dangerous. Or maybe you learn to numb through food, through alcohol, through scrolling, through anything that creates just enough distance between you and your feelings. These behaviors weren't addictions at first. They were familiar, and familiar feels safe, even when it hurts. For some of us, addiction begins as a way to silence the emotional flashbacks we don't even realize we're having. A raised voice can send you spiraling back into being the scared child. A moment of rejection can feel like your whole world collapsing. A quiet room can feel like danger. When the past comes rushing back like that, you don't react as the adult you are. You react as the child who wasn't protected. And in those moments, escape feels like the only option. So you reach for something that softens the blow, something that slows the heartbeat, something that makes the world feel a little less sharp. At first it works. At first it feels like a solution. But patterns built on survival don't know the difference between soothing and self-destruction. They only know relief, and your brain, shaped by years of unpredictability, latches onto anything that promises even a moment of peace. What no one tells you is that survival patterns don't disappear just because you grow up. They evolve. The child who tried to disappear becomes the adult who numbs. The child who overperformed becomes the adult who can't rest. The child who tiptoed around chaos becomes the adult who tolerates unhealthy people because chaos feels familiar. This is how trauma quietly turns into addiction, not in one dramatic moment, but through years of practicing ways to soothe the pain you never learned to name. And here's the hardest truth: none of these patterns were your fault. You built them because your environment didn't offer you safety, so you created your own. You survived the best way you knew how. Addiction didn't grow in weakness, it grew in brilliance, in adaptation, in the ways your younger self protected you when no one else did. And the moment you understand that, shame begins to loosen its grip, because now you can see it clearly. The addiction wasn't the beginning, the survival was. You're a child again, sitting at the edge of your small bed with your legs dangling above the floor, holding a toy that's missing a button eye. You're not really playing with it, you're just squeezing it because your hands need something to hold. The house is too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your heartbeat sound loud in your ears. You don't have the language for it at that age, but something in your chest already knows. The air is about to change, and you need to stay still. Years later, as an adult, you're standing in your kitchen, maybe washing dishes or answering a text, and someone you care about suddenly shifts their tone. It's so subtle, so small, most people wouldn't notice it at all. But you feel it instantly. The same tightness in your chest, the same drop in your stomach, the same instinct to shrink. You don't think, "This reminds me of childhood," but your body reacts as if you're right back on that bed, clutching that half-broken toy. This isn't imagination, it's neuroscience. According to the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, children who grow up in unpredictable or stressful homes develop a hypersensitive amygdala, the brain's danger detector, which means your nervous system sounds the alarm faster and louder than someone who grew up in safety 1. And because your body reacts that strongly, addiction slips in through the side door, not as a bad choice, but as a way to feel okay for just a moment. When your brain is firing off survival signals, you don't feel like an adult with coping skills. You feel like that small child again, hoping things don't explode. Do you reach for something, maybe alcohol, maybe food, maybe work, maybe scrolling, to make your body stop shaking on the inside? You're not trying to get high, you're trying to get quiet. And when you finally feel that tiny bit of calm, even for a second, your brain learns, "Oh, this helps." That's when a pattern begins. Not because you're weak or irresponsible, but because your brain is wired to protect you from pain. And this became the fastest way it knew how. Every time life gets overwhelming, your nervous system sends out the same childhood alarm, and you reach for the same thing that once brought relief. People may look at the behavior and judge it, but they never see the storm happening inside your body. The racing heart, the frozen thoughts, the shame you don't even know how to name. What makes this cycle even harder is that it becomes automatic. Maybe you became the perfectionist who tries to fix everything before it breaks. Maybe you became the quiet one who disappears when tension rises. Maybe you became the peacemaker who never lets others get upset. These were brilliant survival strategies when you were young, but as an adult, they make you more vulnerable to anything that promises a shortcut to comfort. So when someone says, "Why don't you just stop?" they don't understand the truth. They're looking at the visible behavior without seeing the invisible wound. Your addiction didn't begin with the substance or the habit. It began with your nervous system learning year after year that the world wasn't safe and that you needed something, anything, to help you get through it. And here is the part you need to hear. None of this is your fault. The cycle you're fighting didn't start with you. It started with the child who had to survive without protection, and the adult you became is still carrying that child's pain. Understanding this is the first step toward healing, not with shame, but with compassion for the version of you that did the best they could. When you really look closely at your addiction, not the behavior, but the ache underneath it, becomes impossible to ignore something. The part of you reaching for relief is not the adult with bills, responsibilities, and a tired body. It's the child who never felt safe. The child who learned to stay quiet when voices got loud, who hid in their room when tension filled the house, who carried guilt that never belonged to them. Addiction feels powerful because it speaks directly to that child. It promises comfort fast, and when the pain inside you spikes, that promise can feel like the only lifeline you have left. Think about those moments when cravings hit you the hardest. It's usually not random. It's when someone raises their tone, when you feel ignored, when you sense rejection coming, when the room suddenly feels too small. Your adult mind knows you're not actually in danger, but your body, your shoulders tense the way they did when you were young. Your breath shortens, your stomach drops. This is what psychologists call an emotional flashback, the past hijacking the present without warning. And in that moment, you don't crave a substance, you crave escape. Here's what makes this even clearer. Addiction often responds to the exact wound you never got healed. If love felt unpredictable, you may crave anything that gives you warmth fast. If you were shamed, you might use addiction to silence the voice inside that keeps criticizing you. If you grew up unseen, you may chase thrills that make you feel alive for a second. It's not random at all, it's patterned, it's precise, and it's almost poetic how the very pain that shaped you becomes the exact pain you try to numb as an adult. There's a well-known study in the American Journal of Psychiatry 2012 that found adults who struggle with addiction often show heightened amygdala activation, the same fear center that becomes overdeveloped in maltreated children. Scientists found something striking. When exposed to stress, their brains lit up not like adults, but like scared kids. You feel that, don't you? That sudden overwhelm, the sense that everything is too much, the urge to run, hide, or shut down. That's not immaturity, that's an old wound waking up. And here's the truth nobody told you. The strategies you use now, the drinking, the scrolling, the overeating, the isolating, aren't signs of weakness. They're echoes of childhood survival. Back then, you didn't have a therapist, you didn't have language for emotions, you didn't have someone sitting on the edge of your bed saying, "You're safe, I'm here." You had yourself, and you did the best you could. Addiction became the grown-up version of hiding in your room, tuning out chaos, or pretending not to feel. It's an adaptation, not a failure. But adaptations don't stay helpful forever. What protected you at 7 can imprison you at 27. That's why the cycle feels so confusing. You're trying to soothe a wound that your adult self doesn't fully understand, with tools your adult self never consciously chose. And yet, every time you relapse, every time you feel ashamed, the child inside you hears the same old lie. See, you're broken, but you aren't. You're wounded, and there is a difference. So before you can heal addiction, you have to understand whose pain you're soothing. You're not fighting a habit, you're tending to a child inside you who never felt held. And when you see it that way, with softness, not judgment, something shifts. The tension drops, the shame loosens its grip. You begin to realize that the story of addiction is not about failure, but about a younger self who needed safety and never got it. And the moment you see that clearly, you take your first step out of the cycle, not by force, but by compassion. Healing doesn't begin when life gets better. It begins the moment you finally admit to yourself, "I can't keep living like this." Maybe it happens on a quiet night, when you're reaching for the thing that usually numbs you, but this time, something inside you pauses. Even a 2-second pause matters. It means there is still a part of you that wants a different life, a part that refuses to disappear. The first truth you need to know is this: your brain is not broken. It was wired for survival, not happiness. And what was wired through fear can be rewired through safety. Neuroscientist Richard Davidson found that repeated experiences of calm and connection literally strengthen the prefrontal cortex and quiet the amygdala, the brain's alarm system. 1. In simple words, your brain can learn to feel safe the same way it once learned to feel afraid. But you can't rewire fear in isolation. It happens through people, through someone who listens without judgment, someone who doesn't make you feel like a problem. And sometimes it begins with you, breathing through the urge instead of running from it, staying present with the discomfort for just a few seconds longer than before. Each time you do, your body learns, I'm not in danger anymore. With repetition, the craving to escape slowly loses its power. Then the small shifts begin. Your reactions aren't as explosive. You pause before collapsing into old habits. You reach for water, take a short walk, message someone you trust. Simple actions that signal your nervous system is learning new ways to cope. These tiny choices aren't meaningless. They are evidence that your brain is already changing. And eventually, you understand something life-altering. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about proving to your body that the past is over. You're no longer that child who had to survive alone. You're rebuilding your nervous system, one small decision at a time. And every choice you make today is a step out of addiction because it's a step out of the pain that created it. In the end, addiction isn't a sign that you're broken. It's a sign that you've carried pain for far too long without enough safety to heal it. And now you're slowly learning that you deserve more than survival. If any part of this felt like your story, you're welcome to stay, to breathe here a little longer. Subscribe if you'd like to walk this path with others who understand, and share your thoughts below. You don't have to rise alone.